So we have Amy Ivy with us for the second time. And just as a refresher, Amy is a retired horticulturist, and she worked with Cornell Cooperative Extension. So for 31 years, she taught classes and wrote articles and gave advice to all kinds of gardeners, commercial and home growers. She was on a column in the Press Republican in Plattsburgh and a regular guest on the North Country Public Radio. So she has a breadth of knowledge to share with us. So we're happy to have her again.
You're smart.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's really fun to be here again. I enjoy doing this. Quick disclaimer, I was telling Adam and Christina, my grown kids and 2 toddler grandchildren arrived kind of out of the blue a few days ago. So we have a house full of people. So if there's any commotion in the background, I tried to keep it down to a dull roar, but there may be a squawk or 2 out there. So bear with me on that one. So I'm just going to share my screen and get the PowerPoint. So what I did last time that I think worked pretty well was I kind of ran through a quick overview of key points. And I thought that was helpful so that I could at least get the key points across, and then it might prompt you then to think about what do you want to know more about, because we can't cover it all in the time given. So I'll just kind of go through briefly. So try and make a mental note to yourself of what question you want to go into more depth on, and then once I blow through this, then we can spend the rest of the time answering all your questions. Okay. So this is my garden. I took it today. This is what it looks like. So this is what I mean by a raised bed. It doesn't have to be raised that high at all. It can be. You can make it higher if you want, but just this much is enough to really make a difference. So just for terminology, whereas this one back here is not. This one's level with the ground. I did have a garden here, and so I just put the boxes on top of garden soil that I had already prepared. But you could also just plunk this box right onto your lawn, and we'll talk about how to do that too, just right on top. You could even put this in a parking lot. The raised bed can contain the entire garden. You don't have to have good soil underneath it. And that's one of the advantages to using a raised bed, is if you don't have great soil, or you just don't have the equipment or time to really work up the soil, you can just plunk it down onto your existing ground and kind of grow from that point up. So there's one example, and this is mostly vegetables this year. This was the same area, looking kind of from sideways, different perspectives, same beds last year, where I had a lot of flowers, and the zinnias went in there. Everybody loves to grow in a raised bed, so they grow really big, and spacing is always a challenge for me. So you can see I had lots and lots of flowers. These are sweet peas and all kinds of zinnias, rudbeckia, calendula, bachelor buttons, all kinds of stuff in raised beds too. So if you're not into vegetables, you can certainly grow an entire flower garden, or a little of both, which is fun too. So just some quick considerations, and both my daughter and daughter-in-law, the ones who are visiting now, they live in Austin, Texas. They both got into raised beds for the first, gardening for the first time this spring, like so many other people. And I'll tell you, sun is a big consideration. One of them already realized that she put her bed where she's just not getting enough sun. So if you want to grow sun-loving plants, you got to make sure you have enough sun, and really be realistic about that, because she thought she had enough sun, and she can tell now because the plants are all stretched out, kind of leggy, and they need at least 8 hours of sun shining on the bed to be considered full sun. But if you don't have full sun, then you can grow a lot of leafy things like lettuce and things. And there are some flowers that will tolerate sun, but mostly it tends to be, if you're looking for flowers rather than vegetables, it tends to be more the ornamental, like coleus and hostas and things that have pretty leaves, not so much produce a real flower. To get a flower, in most cases, you're going to need to have good sun. Soil is so important, and so that's why the raised beds I mentioned briefly before, that's why the raised bed is such an advantage, because you can, if you have lousy soil, you can just build up from there and not have to worry about what's down below. Here's an example of a picture I saw where they just plunked it, and look how terrible that lawn looks. It's all patchy and bare and just doesn't look great, but they could just plunk their raised bed right down in the middle of the lawn, and away they go. So that's pretty neat that way. Water is going to be important because it's a more confined area, and maybe you do have a shallower soil depth because maybe you are putting it onto poor soil or something like that. You really need to make sure that you have a good water supply. That is one of the downsides, is it does go through water a little more quickly. And I just wanted to talk about compare these three planting systems so that you can see where raised beds fits in. So in ground is kind of the traditional, plant it in the ground, then raised beds, and then of course last week we talked about container. So in ground, the nice thing is you have a bigger confined by the boundaries, so you have a lot of flexibility. You don't have any cost in buying the materials, and you can actually get a machine like a rototiller in there to prepare the soil. But some of the disadvantages are, it's the hand you're dealt. The soil that's in your yard is what you have to work with, and it may be pretty lousy. It may be good, but it may not be that great. So you're going to have to, improve that soil. Some serious weed issues to deal with. Now, last week we talked about container gardening. For those of you who weren't there, it's just handy because you can have a whole garden just on a deck or a patio or something like that. Good drainage is probably the most important take-home message that I want to get to everybody. For containers, the bigger the container, the better, and you will need to water and feed regularly. So it's a good choice for the smaller plants. And then raised beds, which is kind of in between the two. It's like a giant container, basically, is one way to think about it. It's nice to have a frame so that you can kind of contain what you're doing, but I've seen people make raised beds just by digging and mounding up soil in their garden to kind of just make it literally a raised area, and then a lower area, and then another raised area. But they erode away and all that kind of thing. So containing it is kind of nice. I would definitely use wood. I really wouldn't use brick or stone. It's a pain in the neck to deal with weeds and all that kind of stuff. It's really good. Just get the wood and pound it together, and away you go. So here's another example of a raised bed. We talked last time, I think, about pressure treated. I think we did, but don't usually recommend pressure treated if you're going to have vegetables, or else use pressure treated but line it with a heavy plastic, like a heavy plastic bag or something, so that the roots don't come into contact with the lumber. The lumber, people say it's safe, but just to be on the safe side, it would be probably a good idea to put a barrier. Rough cut lumber is great. It takes longer to it will eventually rot away, being wood. So rough cut takes longer to rot away. It's kind of hard to find sometimes. Most of the Home Depot type stores tend to sell pretty more milled lumber, but if you can find rough cuts, great. Hemlock is great because it's very resistant to rot. It's kind of the cedar of the East. If you can find cedar, that's good too. I just use pine. I use 2x10 myself. 2-inch thick lumber is much better than 1-inch thick lumber, 1x lumber, just because it holds up a lot better. One important consideration is don't make the beds more than 3 or 4 feet wide. It may feel like it's pretty skinny, but you're going to be reaching across that span, and I'll tell you, your back is going to give out so quickly if your bed's more than 4 feet wide. At least this way you can get at it on either side, so you're only reaching the 2 feet each way. 12-inch high sides would be wonderful. I think mine are 2x10. But you want to have enough. If it's only like 6 inches high, you really aren't really accomplishing anything. So you want to, I would go for at least 10, like 2x10, and 2x12 would be wonderful if you can get it. And then you fill it, and we can talk more about that, but a mixture of stuff of what to fill it with. You want some topsoil, some compost, some of each. So the more of a mixture you can get, the better to get started with. Oops. And I think this might be a little repetitive, but I did want to show you these hoops are pretty handy. You can just shove this is just PVC pipe, and you can just shove it down inside your beds to make an arch like that you can then hang a row cover. This is to extend the season if you want to get fancy. You can also put insect netting over to keep insects out and things like that. So because you have that frame to hold the pipe within it, it can make it pretty pretty easy, pretty handy for you. But you do have to consider the cost of building. Now you can see here, this one has like it's like a 2x2. It doesn't have to go down into the ground. Some people feel like they have to like have it stick way down the ground to anchor this. I just set mine right on the ground, and I use a 2x2 to hold these two boards together. But it's this little 2x2 square piece here that I'm talking about isn't any higher than the board is. It's just to keep the bed together. It doesn't need to penetrate down below.
And Amy, this doesn't need a bottom, right? It's just the sides.
Oh, that's a very good point. We're going to talk about that, Adam. That's a really good point. And I was trying to get a really nice photograph to illustrate what the point I'm trying to make there, and I couldn't get it to download before we started today. So I had a really good example. Maybe I'll get to that right now, because I don't think I have a good picture. A couple things. Ideally, you would put this raised bed right in your garden so that the roots would start in the wonderful, good stuff on top, and then some of them might reach all the way down into the existing soil that you have, so that the plants that were deep-rooted could keep going if they wanted to and get all the way down. So in that case, you don't want to have a barrier there. You want to let the roots keep going. If you are having in a big weedy area, if you're just plunking your bed down in the middle of your lawn and don't want to kill the grass off first, and the lawn is going to keep trying to encroach back in again, one thing I recommend is using this stuff called landscape fabric. Actually, let's hold that thought, Adam, and make that the question that we come back to first, okay? Because that's a really good point, and the picture that will illustrate it is on the very first slide. I don't want to have to blind everybody I think I'm almost through these slides, so hang on, but that's a very good point. We'll talk about that in just one sec. One of the nice things about raised beds is you can often just buy what you need in bags, and that way if you don't have a pickup truck, you can just throw it in the back of your car. You don't have to have a dump truck or a pickup truck come and deliver a big load of stuff. You can make up that combination of stuff from things you just buy at a garden center kind of place. Again, that mixture. Vermiculite is great if you can get it. It's getting really hard to find though. There's a concept of square foot gardening that if you are very small scale, you might want to look into. There's a book called Square Foot Gardening where they block it out into actually each of those squares are one by 1 foot. So this is a 4 by 4 foot box, and you can see they grow a different thing in each square. That's just something to think about if you want. This is a square foot garden, and here's just another way of using the PVC pipe to keep out critters. Here they have like rabbit and bird. Or the rabbits from getting in, and that way you don't have to fence off your whole garden. You could just fence off that one bed right there. Here's some other ways, a lot of different ways you can protect your raised bed, whether it's square or a rectangle, whatever you want. A lot of different options you have. You can also grow vertically, which is a great way to save space for, like, I have sugar snap peas in mine and sweet peas, and you could grow pole beans and anything cucumbers would go up nicely. Things would really save you some space. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. So getting back to Adam, so now that was, and I did have some pictures if you want to talk about specific crops if we get into that. So let me go back. I'm just going to fly through, close your eyes for a second, because I know I know I get dizzy when I see them go too fast. What I wanted to show you to answer Adam's question is, I'm getting a dry throat. There's this material called landscape fabric, and I was hoping that this part of my garden under the straw or the hay is landscape fabric, and I thought you could see it better. The picture I couldn't download in time was a good example. But what I would suggest you do, if you're going to put it right in the middle of your lawn, or you don't want to deal with weeds, in the long term and stuff, and you're not going to grow great big crops like tomatoes and things that really need to grow down deep, you can just lay a sheet of this landscape fabric. It's woven a kind of poly something material, and it's woven, and it blocks the weeds, but it lets moisture and air go through the material. So you could just lay the landscape fabric down And you can just pin it, you can buy these like great big staples, you just shove that into the soil, hold it down, and then set your raised bed right on top of that landscape fabric so that it stuck out. It extended out like a foot or 18 inches all the way around the bed. And then and then you could just get some bark mulch or something to cover over that to make it look a little nicer. And then that way you would have a nice zone between your lawn and the bed so that you could then drive your, like your lawnmower could go right along the top of that mulch. I don't have it here. I have to keep, so you can see the weeds keep coming in. I have to keep, whacking back at the weeds in this. I try to keep this zone relatively clear. But that would be great. But realize, and if you do that now you've made you do have a bottom so that the crops, you could grow most of the things you see here, onions and lettuce and parsley and all that kind of stuff. But you've limited the depth. Okay.
Amy?
Yes.
With your beds, do you usually put a middle support just to keep the sides from bowing out?
I don't. I haven't seen a problem with it. I think because I'm using such heavy lumber,
Okay.
that I haven't seen that as an issue. And I also try hard to I step in the beds as little as possible. So there's not a lot of external pressure. Maybe I would be happy to do that. Maybe I'm going to regret it. I've had these beds. I think this particular set of beds made them 3 seasons ago. I'm trying to remember now whether this will be my 4th season or my 3rd season with these particular ones. I rebuilt what I'd had before.
And then another.
Go ahead.
For greens, do you really need to have 10 inches deep? I thought that they don't.
You don't have to have 10 inches. You could probably get away with 8 inches, but you still want to have something because they're sensitive to the heat. So if you have too shallow of a root zone and you have a hot spell like we have already this year, they're just going to kind of burn up. So you want to have enough, but you could, so deeper would be better. I mean, if you could go with 10 inches, I think you'd be happier, but I've seen people make them 8 inches.
You talk a little bit about the type of mulch that you would use in a raised bed. So my first raised bed that I built was last year or 2 years ago, I'm sorry, for asparagus. And I put I got it at Cook and Gardner, and it's shredded straw. Mm-hmm. And I know you had mentioned bark mulch earlier. So what's like the best thing to help prevent weeds and also but also so that the vegetables would be able to come through? Just regular straw or shredded straw or the black fabric?
Well, the thing about the fabric is that's going to block. So that's going to stop the weeds from coming up from underneath. If you put fabric down and then you put any kind of mulch on top and it decomposes, weeds can easily grow in that mulch. So it's not going to be it's not a perfect solution, but it just keeps like things like quackgrass and mostly quackgrass for me, that comes from underneath and it'll actually go up through. The general consideration with what kind of mulch is I would use any kind of bark mulch on the outside of the bed where I'm not trying to grow a crop because it breaks down much more slowly. And then if I was mulching within the bed, like I do use grass clippings you can't quite tell, but these are all grass clippings between all these onions here. And I use things like that are going to decompose because I use them partly to block weeds, but also to add organic matter to the soil. So I want them to decompose during the year. I wouldn't put bark mulch in my bed if I was going to be stirring it around. Asparagus, because you're not going to be stirring it again. It's a perennial crop. Then if you wanted to, you could use the bark mulch because you just want something that's just going to stay there. And asparagus can grow up through anything. So it can make its way through the bark mulch with no problem. Okay.
And then so with the lawn clippings, so I usually just mulch them back into the lawn. But so if we use lawn clippings, do you have to let them dry out ahead of time, or do you literally just take them from your bagger and then put them on top?
When I can, we have you see we have a big lawn. We have
Yeah,
a
you do.
sweeper, and we sweep up afterwards. You know, we have a riding lawnmower. My husband's the lawnmower, and then he sweeps. So then he drags the sweeper around behind the lawnmower, you know, afterwards. And I find them easier to handle when they're still green. I can grab a big handful of them, but the key is make sure you don't put them down more than about an inch thick when they're green, because they get all moldy and hot and, you know,
Okay.
funky. If I let them dry and then put them down, that's fine, but they tend to blow around while I'm doing it. They get in my face. And I put some of these,
Oh, you mean
and I was worried about them blowing away too. So if I can, I would rather put them down while they're green.
Okay, I have the blowing away problem with the shredded straw. So
Yeah, that's
okay,
why I
thank
like
you.
it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
What other questions do you all have? Or would you like me to go into more?
Well, I know, Christina, this was your first year doing raised beds. Did you put them in? Did you have some of these things handy for you when you were doing that?
So mine are the really raised ones. So they're about hip level or a little bit taller for me, I guess. They're so big that my daughter got into it and it looks like it's a coffin. Yeah, it was pretty sad. I was just looking for the picture actually, but I don't have it.
Again, that's then, Christina, so there's air underneath them?
Well, and yeah, there is. And so I was wondering, last week you had mentioned that you could put styrofoam in the bottom of some of the containers in order to take up some of the space so that it's not completely full with soil. Mm-hmm. Would you do that with a raised bed as well?
Well, yeah, that's what I was getting at. Because if they're up on legs, there's air underneath. If it's really like a table, we've done things for nursing homes that's wonderful, or any kind of folks who aren't as limber as they used to be, and you can make literally a raised bed up on legs, so that you can even make them so you can get a wheelchair underneath them if you want. But the thing is, then a lot of times you end up with a very shallow bed. So you have the legs like a table, and then instead of a flat tabletop, now you've got the bed up there.
Oh no, this one is
those
huge.
fry. Those concern me because they dry out so quickly. Joanne is a Master Gardener volunteer, and you guys have put in some of these. How deep, the ones that because you've kind of perfected the technique, Joanne. Do you know how deep your raised beds are?
Yeah, originally we were making them 10 inches, but now we're making them 12 inches.
Yeah, because of
but
that.
It's definitely keeping them watered is the key. And we recommend, if people can, if they put a drip irrigation or a soaker hose in there, just to make their life easier for watering. But we've had great success we mostly are at senior housing, and people have been doing really well with them.
It's so nice to not have to bend over so far. It's just wonderful. So Christina, you could then, instead of having the tabletop like I was just describing with Joanne there, you can also just make a bed, let me use my pointer, where this is 10 inches, you could make this wall 30 inches tall. You could stack 3 boards, one on top of the other, and then that's where you're talking, where you might want to fill the bottom with something just to take up space, because that's a huge volume of soil. And you don't need that much soil. Most of the, maybe carrots, or believe it or not, carrots are really deeply rooted. Carrots or tomatoes or something might want, but nothing else. It's a kind of a waste of space to have that. It's not a problem, but you just don't want to fill that much with soil. So in that case, and since it's on the ground, I might use something, if you could find, rocks, just something nice and big. Maybe not something plastic. Maybe something, natural. If you can, because the weight doesn't matter there, and then fill up like the bottom, foot maybe with as many big boulders as you can.
And what about the spacing? You had showed the square foot garden. Do you recommend a foot in between items, or between plants?
No, so the square foot thing was you cram a whole lot of plants into 1 square foot. So I'd rather, let me use this example, these 2 examples. So here I totally messed up. This was last year. This is so crowded. This is crazy. This is, I can't even remember what I had here. I think this is parsley and cilantro. And then I put beans in my, this is where I had the garlic. That's right. And these are bush beans. Yeah, these are bush beans in a 4-foot. Well, anyway, you can see how things are spilling over the side. They're really crowded in here. So I tried to be better this year, because you really do want to have the plants between. You can put the plants side by side, but you want them to have in between each plant to have enough room to grow well. And I've done well. These are shallots. I did really well. I'm really proud of my spacing with my shallots. And here's my garlic. See, you can't quite tell how far apart they're, but see, they're spaced there, but yet they are side by side. There aren't bare rows. Like in a regular garden, you would have like an aisle to walk down, so you'd have like 18 inches of nothing growing. It's kind of wasted space. So in a raised bed, you basically pack everything side by side by side, but within each plant, it should be at its best spacing, so it's not competing. You can see with the lettuce, I do go a little bit nuts with my lettuce, because when I harvest it, I just yank out whole baby plants. So I kind of thin it as I'm harvesting it. And it definitely is overplanted. I definitely did too much there. So the square foot gardening, if you want to get into it, then get the book and read about it. But it's very, it's kind of it's a method all into itself. But the principle being, know how much room the plants want and give them that much room.
And it looks like you can plant flowers and vegetables together.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to do that. I usually do like all this stuff here. This is calendula at the front here. I've got some sweet alyssum here and here. More the calendula volunteers. I plant it once and I have it forever. I got some Johnny jump ups back here. And then these are all chive flowers. All this purple, those are all the flowers off of the chives, which are pretty. But here you can see it was mostly flowers. I didn't have as many vegetables at all. I was wondering, is there another raised bed picture that I can show you? Nah, nothing else. This is space. See how they're side by side? The leaves are just touching, but they aren't all crammed in and kind of growing over each other. So this is wish it were mine. This is a nicely spaced garden as well.
What is that in there? Is there lettuce in there?
Yeah. So this is these 2 here are spinach. This is one kind. There's probably 2 different kinds of lettuce, and it looks like something tall growing up the middle. I'm not sure. It looks like they stuck in a tall. I can't see what that is. Maybe it could be tomatoes or something down the middle. Some people will plant lettuce right next to tomatoes, and then they pull, because the lettuce and spinach poop out in the heat. So you can start them all at the same time, plant them all at the same time, and then harvest out the lettuce and spinach. And then that gives room as the tomatoes are really starting to grow and get big, then these plants will then be gone and they can have the whole space to themselves.
Well, I have a bed like this. It's on stilts. And I have lettuce planted on one side and spinach on the other side. But what I want to know is, how big does the spinach get, or the lettuce get, before I start picking it?
Oh, you can pick it anytime. Like this is pretty mature. This picture here is primo for picking right now. And you can either pick it, like for spinach, I just break off the older leaves and leave the center of the plant, because it will continue to grow more leaves. So I just keep picking off the outer ones, and then it keeps growing. The spinach poops out when the weather gets too hot. It bolts, and it starts tasting bitter, and it tastes terrible. Lettuce does that too for us. The lettuce, you can either pick off the outer leaves in the same way and let the center plant grow, or you can cut off individual plants at the soil line, and like you might pick one and then go down a few plants and then cut off another one and go down a few plants. So you're kind of thinning it as you are harvesting.
Is that thinning it out? You have to thin it out?
Yeah, so doing it that way. Yeah, because with the lettuce, when you harvest lettuce, it's an end game, right? When you harvest it, that plant is done. Either you're taking off the outer leaves and leaving the inner leaves to keep growing, and then they will get bigger, and that's a continual harvest off of one any one plant, or you can plant them thickly and then take this plant out and take that plant, I have to be careful, just take every few plants out, so that then now you have space that these two can grow grow more and get bigger, and then I'll eventually take those out, and then my spinach will be gone. It'll be done.
Oh, okay.
It will be finished by I'd say 4th of July.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and then you get the spinach out of there, and then you can put bush beans right in there. Bush beans come on really fast. They love the warm weather. Basil would be another thing to plant, because they need that warm weather. They're relatively quick. And then in that same spot, after like in late August, after you've taken out the basil or the beans, then you can plant spinach or lettuce for a fall crop. And then it loves the cool, and it'll grow all fall. And you can.
I read where you can start celery from the end in some water and then plant it. Will it grow?
It's a fun thing to do with your grandkids, but if you want to grow celery, that is a challenge, especially in our climate. Celery wants to be on the Mediterranean coast. Wants it to be really moist, and some people do grow it. It tends to be it's a tough one to grow. That would not be a beginner.
Well, I'm going to try it anyway.
Yeah, go ahead. It's fun. It's fun to experiment.
I cut up some sprouted potatoes and planted them, and they're growing wonderfully.
Yeah, potatoes are fun. You can even grow them in a bucket, and you any kind of a container. I've seen people even grow them in an old bale of straw too. But you can just plant them in about 6 inches of soil, and then as the plant grows, you keep adding more soil, so you're burying the stem, because that's where the potatoes form. So you just keep burying it, and you kind of fill up the bucket. Make sure you have drainage holes at the bottom of that bucket, and then potatoes will form all up and down. It's really fun.
Right.
Cool.
Okay.
So are you saying that you shouldn't use a fabric? I was thinking of experimenting this year with my tomato plants and using a fabric in between the plants to try to mitigate the weeds. That's not an optimal.
On top of the soil, you can. I'm talking about putting it on the bottom of.
Put the on top of the soil. Is that a superior weed barrier than grass?
It's great. Yeah, that actually is what. Let me see if I have a picture. That you can't tell. Here, let me use my pointer. You can't tell, but that's a row of tomatoes right there, and you kind of see the darkness. That's weed fabric. I have the landscape fabric going right up to either side.
All right, so that'll work in a raised bed as well.
Yes. I'm glad you clarified that. I was talking about for the bottom.
Okay. And Joanne, if your things are bowing, because I had one bowing, I just took a piece of metal and drove it in on the outside.
Yeah, the ones we make when we bring them to the different centers, we do put a center support in there, just because we're not there a lot, and
Sure.
Hopefully they're maintenance free for people.
Oh yeah, it certainly wouldn't hurt. But then you will have a divider there though too.
Yes, you'll have a divider. You have to not plant on top of it, but that's pretty easy to figure out.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a good kind of a insurance system.
So I'm not very experienced with the raised beds. I've had a garden before, and when the season's over, I just kind of let it go by the wayside. I don't really do a whole lot. I don't cover it up or anything like that. Is there anything that you do with the raised beds that you have to, you cover it, or what should you do?
Yeah, and that goes to the whole soil health aspect. In general, we try not to have bare soil ever. It's kind of a goal, is to always have your soil covered. It makes for healthier soil. So in the end, what I do is I yank out the crops as they finish, as they frost out or whatever. I yank them out, and then I'll either put more grass clippings on top. I rake up. I hog leaves like crazy. I'll rake up leaves and pile them on. So I can cover it in some way. You could plant a cover crop. You could plant something like crimson clover. I wouldn't plant a real big crop, but crimson clover would be really nice to plant in the fall. That would come up and then it would die over the winter. And so that would be a nice thing to have. But do something to cover the ground, ideally. You don't have to, but that's kind of a, that's.
Amy, if you use leaves, shouldn't they be mulched leaves?
They don't have to be, and I don't think because you're putting them in the fall and then they'll have all winter.
Okay.
You mean like aged leaves or like semi-rotted?
Well, what we do is, I mean, we've got lots of trees on our property, and so in the fall we bought a machine that actually sucks them up and mulches them.
Oh, you shred them. You chop them up.
We chop
That's
them
what you
up.
meant by mulch, not decomposed.
No, not decomposed.
Yeah. Chopped up would be great. Either you can mow your leaves
Mow
on the
over.
lawn before you rake them up. And yeah, if you have a chipper shredder, oh my goodness, the shredder is fantastic. It's so much nicer because then the leaves, they decompose more quickly. They don't pack down too much. Oh, that's ideal. Yeah, if you can do that, that's fabulous.
And actually what we do is we have such an excess of leaves. We have a big pile we keep for the winter. And like right now, I've mulched all my flower beds with those mulched leaves rather than buying mulch.
Yes, yeah, that's great. Makes so much sense rather than bringing something on. You have your ready-made mulch right there on your own property.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. That's the gold standard if you can do it. That's great.
All right.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions? Anybody curious about things that Amy might be able to answer for you?
I don't know. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Okay, thank you. So Adam, I was going to ask the exact same question. So the only raised bed that I've ever built or that I've ever had has been the asparagus. We have a bunch of vegetable gardens. I'm kind of taking the motto that says, if you plant it, you have to eat it rather than using it for looks. So the Charlie Nardozzi model. But my question is, so when we build these new raised beds, should we be turning the soil over at the end of the season, like I would typically do in the ground, or am I doing more harm than good?
Yeah, that's a big topic. For the sake of soil health, the less you disturb your soil, the better. Now, there are times when you need to disturb it with a purpose, like to mix in, if you put an amendment like lime on, or if you like peat moss or your compost pile.
Yep.
I just take a shovel and just hand flip it over. I just go down in a row and just hand flip it over once a year. I try not to do it too much. The less that you disturb the soil, the healthier your soil. It's all about the microorganisms in the soil and the whole, that whole web of life that's in there. It used to be we would pulverize like crazy, and we would just till it all up till it looked like fine powder and feel really good about it. And that's the old way. So less is better. And then I try not to step. I try to step as little as possible. I have to get in the bed in order to do that shovel trick, but otherwise I try very hard to not compress the soil with my feet.
Okay, and then if we cover it up in the fall, for example, like with shredded leaves or with shredded grass clippings, what should we do in the spring when we're ready to plant our vegetables?
Great question.
Take them off.
So if there is something left, because sometimes it'll just all decompose over the winter, especially if you've been able to make fine pieces of it. But
Okay.
I would, the thing is, it keeps the soil cool. It insulates the soil. So if you want to get your garden started, then rake that stuff back, whatever you have left, but hang on to it, because that's good stuff. So rake it to the side, let the sun shine on the brown soil, and it will warm it up more quickly for you. So then you can get it planted, and then once the crops come up, then you can shove that wonderful, this is now aged mulch, which is even
Right.
better. And you can put it back around, or you can just part the row. If you're not planting too much, you can make a little furrow through the mulch. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of times it'll
do
be
you have
gone.
and then do you one more question? This has been great. Thank you. So I know you had mentioned bush beans earlier. So last year I had great bush beans. This year, some of them I think are being eaten by rabbits. How would a raised bed help with that? Because I've tried using 1/2-inch mesh, but that's really tricky to work with. And I tried bird netting, and bird netting is just really tricky. It's fairly easy to put up, but then every time we want to go and harvest something, it's So what?
Yeah, I would use a heavier mesh. Bird netting is a pain in the neck because it's
Yeah,
so
it is.
floppy. It's floppy and it gets stuck
Right,
on the
exactly. Yeah.
leaves. You need a
And it
frame.
tears.
So either make a frame like this and then drape the bird netting. But bird netting isn't going to keep a rabbit out either. For
Right.
rabbits, you really need to use some kind of heavier. This
Like a
looks
hardware
like a
cloth.
chicken wire, but hardware cloth would be even better. And
Okay.
then what's neat about a raised bed is you can use the frame of the bed as the base because that there's a barrier right there, and you can build up from that base. So yeah, this guy just shoved the pipe right down into the raised bed, and this
Yeah.
guy's sitting it. So you can. My daughter, she has squirrels that are driving her crazy, and so she used zip ties. She got like a heavy mesh, a plastic mesh, I think. And she made some kind of a ingeniously made some kind of a door because you have to get in there to weed it. So she shoved her pipes in the ground, and then somehow I think it's with Velcro maybe she's able to open and reach in because it's not that deep, of a bed. You just have to jerry rig something clever.
Okay.
Yeah, but I wouldn't use bird netting for a rabbit.
Quick
Okay.
comment on that piping.
Mhm.
I took a greenhouse horticulture class at a school, and they actually took some PVC pipe and put like a 2.5-inch little corner in each corner of PVC pipe so you could slide them into that.
You mean like a bracket to slide it
Yeah,
down?
yeah, it worked really well. You take
That's
a metal
neat.
strap with a little zip gun, you can attach them to each of the corners, and then you have a sleeve to put those in.
That's great. Yeah.
And it works fabulous. When you
Somebody-
get these horrific rainstorms, you can extend your gardening several months on both ends.
Yeah, because you can cover with heavier and heavier material.
Yep.
Yeah, it's fun.
The other thing that I've had, the other problem that I've had with the bird netting is if I drape it over or even to the side of my blueberries,
Mm-hmm.
it seems to pull off the
berry.
buds itself whenever I pull the netting off that it's touching, and then they're instead of the birds eating it, I'm just pulling them off myself. So
Right. With the bird netting, you really have to have a structure.
yeah,
You
okay.
drape it over. It really isn't. You really can't lay it right on the. I mean, you can, but it's really not successful if you lay it right on the plant.
Okay, I like this especially the one on the right because it looks very light too.
Yeah. That guy doesn't look like he's straining at all, does he?
Great. Okay.
But there are a million solutions. Oh my goodness, so many different ways to approach this. That's one of the fun parts. And that's why talking to other gardeners is fun because you ask 100 gardeners, you're going to get 100 different ideas for how to solve something. So
Well, I know. I built a little frame it's 1x6, I think, 1x6s for my strawberries, and I had to actually build a second one because the strawberries are now probably about 12 inches tall, the flowers themselves. So I literally built another frame and then just put it on top. But
an addition.
yeah, This is great. Thank you. Go
Okay.
ahead, Christina. I took your turn.
Oh, Steve, don't worry about it. I was just wondering, actually, any idea where people can get plants or vegetable plants right now?
I haven't looked lately because I got mine on time, but I would look around. I mean, places like Cook and Gardner who sell larger size. I mean, the problem is when those little 6-packs that things come in, plants don't last long in those, because it's a smaller space. So it's more economical to buy them like that, but that you can't hold them for very long. So now. So actually a lot of that, back when I used to work with nurseries, a lot of them plan for a 4th of July because a lot of the summer people come up and they want to plant a garden like late June. So a lot of people will actually plan for a second flush of planting, requests. But they tend to be, you want to look for more like 3-inch pots. So they're going to be more expensive. But so a place like Cook and Gardner I think they carry things pretty much, through 4th of July.
They don't have a lot right now, and I asked them when they're getting inventory. They said everybody's planting, so they're having a difficult time with the greenhouses getting them.
Mm-hmm.
I did have some success finding some at Lowe's, but boy, it's hard to find vegetables this time of year.
Yeah, with Lowe's, you'd have to get them like right off the truck too, you know, because
Yeah.
if you can time it, so they're coming right from the greenhouse to you, basically.
And I would assume it's too late for seeds at this point.
For most of them, you could still plant the quick things. So you could plant the basil, beans, lettuce, especially lettuce and spinach for the fall. I wouldn't try planting them right now. If you can find onions, well, onion sets are weird because I wouldn't try onions now. Yeah, it is on the late side for schools. But herbs, parsley, cilantro, dill, beans, carrots. I need carrot. If you have you need a lot of depth and nice loose soil for carrots, radishes, anything that's on the smaller, quicker side. Kohlrabi, broccoli. Broccoli I wouldn't plant now, but plant broccoli for the fall.
Oh, broccoli for the fall. Okay. And the ideal time to start a garden?
Well, we almost had a frost like last week, right? So who knows? In general, the things that are tender to the frost, that are hardy, like lettuce and spinach and peas. I personally set my stuff out around the 1st of May. I watch the weather, but around the 1st of May, because they can take a light frost. And then the things that are sensitive to the frost, like beans and tomatoes and peppers, and marigolds and zinnias, I wait until at least May 20th to plant. That's kind of the safe, and even May, So that's the very rough. I mean, it's all over the place. And then there are microclimates. If you're in the city of Plattsburgh, it's a lot warmer than it is out in the country. And if you're at a higher elevation, it's different.
Where do you live, Christina?
I live in Morrisonville.
Okay, you're not too high up, so, okay. Yeah, I have some friends that live in Chazy Lake and Dannemore, and,
They're late. I wouldn't plant.
They're rough. That's rough.
Yeah. Yeah, like in Lake Placid, any of the higher elevations, a lot of them wait until like the first week of June. And for good reason. I mean, look how close we came to having they did have a frost actually up there.
Yeah, they did.
I lost my basil. It got down to 40 degrees. Was it 2 weeks ago? It got down to like 38 that one night. And it didn't die, but it all turned brown. And luckily the growing points are still growing, but the leaves I had were all damaged. Even though it didn't freeze, basil is the most touchy. It doesn't tolerate that. So anyway, it's a little bit of a crapshoot. So that's why that's part of gardening is my kids said they planted their gardens and they were also happy. We were also sharing pictures back and forth and everything was coming up. And then the problems started happening. I said, welcome to gardening. People came and, dug up the radishes and, I was like, yep, it's there's a lot of heartache in gardening, but that's what makes it so much fun. That's why you're so thrilled when something does well. It's like, yes.
Yeah, I will celebrate.
Yeah, that's why gardeners do that. It's like people come over and I say, look at my potatoes. You won't believe how beautiful I'm. This year my potato crop is the best ever. In fact, maybe there might be a picture of it here. Hang on, you might be able to see it in the background. No, you can't. They're right after. They're right over here to the right in the ground. I don't have them in a raised bed. They're right over here, but they're gorgeous.
Looking at grandchildren, look at the vegetables.
Oh, I have my 4-year-old grandson trained to look for potato beetles. He's good.
There you go.
Oh, that's great.
They're just about eye level with him, so it's perfect. Anyway. Speaking of grandchildren, I probably better get going, and I've asked them to be quiet long enough, so I probably better get back. Shall I turn off the recording at this point, and then you can say your goodbyes? Let me stop sharing. I think I can pause.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm going to stop the recording now. Bye, everybody on the